A second belief that needs comparison and contrast when approaching the question of whether or not Mormonism is Christian deals with the person of God. For depending on how one views God will also depend on whether or not one is following the true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or if he is following something else that has taken the place of God and is an idol. Historic Christianity has held to the biblical belief that God is not a man, as seen in Numbers 23:19, but a person whose essential character is spirit, as seen in John 4:24. Sometimes a Christian will run across a Mormon who tries to circumvent these verses by claiming that in the first reference a false prophet is the one making the declaration, and hence his statement is to be called into question. In the latter reference, a rebuttal is offered which says that God is a spirit, just like everyone else, making it appear as if John is saying that God possesses a spirit, like everyone else. However, both rebuttals are easily countered by merely appealing to the context themselves. In Numbers 23:19, Balaam is indeed a false prophet, making the declaration. But the context shows that it is God himself placing the words in Balaam's mouth, as seen in verses 12 and 16, to convey to Balak. In John's reference, Jesus is speaking about true worship, and that the only way a person can truly worship God is in spirit and in truth, since God himself is a spirit being. In fact, Jesus goes out of his way to emphasize the quality of God's being, which John records, by grammatically placing the Greek word pneuma, which is translated spirit, at the start of verse 24, which in Greek grammar denotes emphasis. Hence, God is spirit, not God is a spirit or God has a spirit like everyone else. Historic Christianity not only believes that God is a spirit being, but that he is completely self-sufficient and self-existent as well. There are no other beings in existence that are like God. None. That is part of the reason why the Apostle Paul would tell the Athenians that God was not in need of anything. Conversely, all that is not God is in need of God for its existence. He gives to all life and breath and all things necessary to exist. In fact, Hippolytus, one of the many early church fathers who would write similarly of God's aseity or self-existence, said, "When first the self-existent Father, he who is inconceivable and without substance, he who is neither male nor female, willed that his own ineffability should become realized in something spoken, and that his invisibility should become realized in form, he opened his mouth and sent forth similar to himself a logos." Hence what Hippolytus is saying is that not only was God self-existent in himself, but so is the logos, who earlier in John's Gospel is identified as Jesus Christ. And since God is self-existent, that character in itself separates him from all other beings that are contingent upon him for their existence. In other words, there is a marked difference between the one Creator and the many creatures. When one turns to Mormonism, though, one gets a completely different view of God. God was not always self-existent, and in fact, Mormon writers tell us that God is an exalted man. It is something that more and more Mormons are attempting to keep hidden from the general public through comments demonstrating hesitancy on not knowing for sure exactly what took place with God prior to his exaltation to godhood. Such maneuvers, though, are deceptive in nature, given the numerous comments by Mormon leaders affirming the humanness of God, starting with the official doctrine that the Father has a body of flesh and bones as tangible as man's, found in Doctrine and Covenants 130, verse 22. Well, if God the Father has this physical body, and it is as tangible as man's, then obviously he was and is a human being, whether exalted or otherwise. Another eccentricity related to the God of Mormonism is how the Mormon God came to be God. The founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, said during an oft-quoted sermon of his known as the King Follett Discourse that, in order to understand the subject of the dead, for consolation of those who mourn for the loss of their friends, it is necessary we should understand the character and being of God, and how he came to be so. For I am going to tell you how God came to be God. We have imagined and supposed God was God from all eternity. I will refute that idea and take away the veil so that you may see. Unfortunately, neither Joseph Smith nor anyone else associated with Mormonism ever explained how God came to be what He is, especially if He was not always God in the first place from eternity past. The law of eternal progression, which is the legalistic method proposed by the Mormon Church for all aspiring males to follow if they want to become gods themselves, is perhaps the most logical suggestion. Yet whatever the case, however He became God, between the Mormon God's physicality and potentiality, it bears absolutely no resemblance to the God that Christians have historically and biblically subscribed to.